So I was minding my own business today when I stumbled across an old article about George R. R. Martin, and I thought, what better time to discuss it than during the Season 8 fiasco that is running amok for this TV series. Just so we're clear, I'm not going to be talking too much about the show right now. This video is more about a blog post Neil Gaiman made a while back, which was posted 10 years ago if you can believe it, but it still applies because this is about entitlement issues. I read over it before, and the gist of it is about Neil Gaiman addressing a fan email. The fan expresses concern over the often repeated complaint of George R. R. Martin and his tendency for belated progress on the latest A Song of Ice and Fire books. Here it is. Hi Neil, I've recently subscribed to George R. R. Martin's blog in the hopes of getting some inside information regarding when the next Song of Ice and Fire book is due to be released. I love the series, but since subscribing to the blog, I've become increasingly frustrated with Martin's lack of communication on the next novel's publication date. In fact, it's almost as though he's doing everything in his power to avoid working on his latest novel, which poses a few questions. With blogs and Twitter and other forms of social media, do you think the audience has too much input when it comes to scrutinizing the actions of an artist? If you had announced a new book 2 years ago, and were yet to deliver, do you think avoiding the topic on your blog would lead readers to believe you were being slack? By blogging about your work and life, do you have more of a responsibility to deliver on your commitments? When writing a series of books, like Martin is with A Song of Ice and Fire, what responsibility does he have to finish the story? Is it unrealistic to think that by not writing the next chapter, Martin is letting me down, even though if and when the book gets written, is completely up to him? Would be very interested in your insight. Cheers, Gareth. Neil's immediate response is a little dismissive with just a plain no to suffice for the entirety of the first question, which, if you read through the whole thing, doesn't even make sense since there's multiple questions. I think he was referring more to the part about being slack for missing deadlines and announcing a book right here. But you know what, let's not get too hasty with conclusions yet. Let's see what else he's got to say. His second answer has a little bit more substance, and it goes like this. Yes, it's unrealistic of you to think George is letting you down. Look, this may not be palatable, Gareth, and I keep trying to come up with a better way to put it, but the simplicity of things, at least from my perspective, is this. George R. R. Martin is not your bitch. This is a useful thing to know, perhaps a useful thing to point out when you find yourself thinking that possibly George is indeed your bitch, and should be out there typing what you want to read right now. People are not machines. Writers and artists aren't machines. You're complaining about George doing other things than writing the book you want to read, as if you're buying the first book in the series was a contract with him that you would pay over your $10, and George, for his part, would spend every waking moment until the series was done writing the rest of the books for you. No such contract existed. You were paying your $10 for the book you were reading, and I assume that you enjoyed it because you want to know what happens next. Okay, there's a lot to unpack about this section right here. First off, what the fuck is with this snappy attitude from Neil? I mean, his fan just asked this very in-depth question, very considerate, very respectful, about what a fan can expect from an author that they follow enthusiastically. And immediately, Neil isn't shitting on him, but it's only a step above it at the moment. I mean, Jesus. But again, let's give Neil the benefit of the doubt and just focus on what he's talking about. So the first section of this answer, Neil's talking about writers not being machines and whatnot, which is, a fair point in a general concept, as a general statement about writers. But this is about George R. R. Martin right now. This isn't about your typical fan-author relationship. So maybe there's some more substance, a bit more nuance to it than Neil's letting on to. So since this was written in 2009, this was about A Dance with Dragons. From what I remember, George R. R. Martin made a terrible mistake in trying to put a deadline on his own writing, and failed miserably at the window that he promised the fans that it would be complete by. It's always been a running joke about George R. R. Martin that his turnover for books is horrendously bad. But in actuality, It's only been over the past couple decades that things have really started to slow to a crawl. I mean, if you look at the release dates for A Song of Ice and Fire books, initially it wasn't that bad. Game of Thrones and Clash of Kings was 3 years apart. Clash of Kings and Storm of Swords was 1 year apart. Storm of Swords and Feast for Crows was 5 years apart. And then A Dance with Dragons really took a while, with 6 years being the most of the published books so far. Taking a second to just look at this, it'll become pretty apparent that something's not right. The first 3 books, from 96 to 2000, that's 4 years. The last 2, twice as long, more than twice as long. It took 11 years just to get those last 2. Furthermore, the second longest book of the series, A Storm of Swords, took less than 2 years to make. Whereas A Dance with Dragons, which is literally, ignore the pages for the moment and just look at the workout. It's only 184 words longer than A Storm of Swords, but it took 6 full years. This is just the backdrop of the series since 2011. Going on to Winds of Winter, that shit has been 8 years in the making. It's the longest drought ever for this series by a considerable margin. George is slowing down exponentially in this series, and I want to talk about why I think that is the case, but first, let's keep going with Neil's article for now. First off, this line right here is utter bullshit. There's nothing in Gareth's letter to suggest that he's complaining about anything, let alone something unreasonable. In fact, he's even gone so far as to ask you, Neil, if he has any right to be as frustrated as he is. And frankly, he fucking does. The patience you're demanding of George's fans is unprecedented. I mean, the man has had plenty of breaks. Plenty. Maybe he's gotten a little bit too comfortable with taking them. Ever since he missed his deadline with A Dance with Dragons, the backlash he received from fans prompted him to go completely silent on social media and never report about any progress made on the upcoming books. Yet he still has time to promote the Wildcard series that he edits, which nobody gives a fuck about. Don't even pretend that George is being worked to death to finish this series. Which, by the way, if he fails to finish, would be a spit in the face to his loyal fans. People don't waste their time and money reading stories that they know will never have a resolution. George failing time and time again to be punctual on his release dates is just unprofessional. So spare me the intricacies of the challenges of writing books. It's universal, it's a fact of life. Every single author has to go through that grind. The difference between an amateur writer and a professional is their ability to complete projects in a timely manner. Between the show and his books, he's earned millions of dollars and acquired fans across the world. He's living the author's dream. And frankly, he seems to be taking most of it for granted. With all that said, you believe the fans are the entitled ones. If George were a less prominent author, he'd never see a book deal again. That's how far below his productivity is to industry standards. People have expectations for you to perform, and if you don't deliver and you don't communicate, this is what happens. I know you want to stick up for your friend, Neil, but George isn't entirely blameless here. He took up an enormous responsibility, and now it's starting to bite him in the ass. I hate to draw my own conclusions, but I'm starting to believe George R.R. Martin has fallen out of love for making A Song of Ice and Fire. Unfortunately, if that's true, it wouldn't be that surprising. By August, the series will be 23 years old by its publication date, and that's not even factoring in the time it took George to write the first draft of the first book. Even as a creator, it's incredibly difficult to sustain interest in a single story that long. Loving what's already finished is easy. It's no doubt in my mind that George loves what he created, but it's an entirely different thing to assume he loves to continue to create it. As much as I harp on the man, I do sympathize with that. But if my theory is accurate, he's handling it the worst way possible. Justifying all his book delays as polishing the manuscript to top-notch quality is removing all accountability for his workflow. His earlier books of similar if not superior quality took a fraction of the time to publish. And whether by intention or design, the show ended up shouldering all the responsibility to tie everything up for George. That was unfair for them, and it was unfair for the fanbase. As expected, the show's ending is so far rushed and sloppy, and in a few days' time, all the attention will flip right back to George and his books. The poor reception of Season 8 is already accelerating the transition of this focus. People want George to swoop in and fix everything because they trust him, but George isn't reciprocating whatsoever for that trust. This is why acknowledging fan complaints is important. It's not just about keeping up appearances, it's a mark of true dedication. If you buy into the bullshit that Neil is selling, that an author's work is voluntary, cannot be confined to deadlines, and subject to termination by the passing whim of distress, you set up poor infrastructure to achieve stability in quantity and quality of creative content. You sabotage yourself before you get off the ground. All this article is excuses. It is enabling George's ineptitude, which in turn is making him more unmotivated to finish the series and making the wait slower and more agonizing for everyone, most crucially, himself. Hopefully George will come to the realization of this before it ruins his career.